The email arrived at 6:42 a.m. Darius Coleman stared at the screen for a long second before opening it, even though he already knew what it said. He always knew. The subject line was too polite. Too rehearsed. Thank you for your interest. He didn't delete it right away. He never did. He let it sit there, like proof of something invisible but heavy. Outside his apartment window, the city was waking up, buses sighing, sirens distant, people rushing toward jobs that either paid too little or asked too much. Darius dressed carefully, the way he always did. Crisp shirt. Neutral tie. Shoes polished, though no one ever noticed them. Today mattered. Not because he believed it would change everything, but because he was tired of being told he was imagining things. The interview was at a glass-walled tech campus on the north side of the city. White walls, minimalist furniture, motivational quotes etched into steel panels. Innovation begins with people. Darius read it twice and almost laughed. At reception, the woman smiled automatically until she looked up. Her eyes paused on him for half a second too long. "Name?" she asked. "Darius Coleman." "Interview with Meridian Solutions," she typed, nodded, then frowned slightly. "Oh, you're early." "I'm on time," Darius said gently. She handed him a badge. "You can wait over there." The waiting area was empty. Every chair clean, every surface spotless. He sat. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Through the glass wall, he saw two white men walk into the interview room, laughing, coffee cups in hand. One of them glanced at Darius, then quickly looked away. A woman in heels passed by and whispered something to the receptionist. They both looked at him again. Finally, a man stepped out, mid-40s, expensive watch, smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Darius?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Brian. Follow me." The room was bright. Too bright. 3 interviewers sat at one side of the table. They shook his hand briefly. "So," Brian began, leaning back. "Tell us about yourself." Darius answered smoothly. "Experience. Metrics. Results." He spoke clearly, confidently, the way he always did. They nodded, but something was off. They didn't interrupt with curiosity. They interrupted with doubt. "Are you sure you've led that project? That's a large budget for someone at your level. Can you explain how you fit into our culture?" Culture. That word always arrived last, like a verdict. Halfway through the interview, Brian glanced at his phone. "We're actually running short on time," he said. "But this has been informative." Darius felt it then. The shift. The ending before the ending. Before we wrap up, Darius said calmly, "may I ask a question?" Brian hesitated. "Sure. What exactly are you looking for in this role that I haven't addressed?" Silence. The woman cleared her throat. "It's not about skills. It's more about alignment." "With what?" Darius asked. No answer. 3. The interview ended 3 minutes later. In the lobby, the receptionist avoided eye contact. Outside, the air felt colder. Darius didn't scream. Didn't punch a wall. Didn't post online. He went home and opened his laptop. He replayed the interview recording. Because this time, he had recorded everything. Not secretly. Legally. He watched the moment their tone changed. The micro-expressions. The pauses. The coded language. Then he did something different. He sent the video to social media bud to Meridian's biggest client. With a single line. "Is this the company you trust with your brand?" May morning, His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Emails. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. One message stood out. We need to talk. Meridian went into damage control fast. Statements. Apologies. Internal reviews. But the video spread anyway. Not because it was loud. Because it was familiar. People recognized the silence. The doubt. The smile that hid dismissal. A week later, Darius was invited back to Meridian. This time, security held the door open. Brian looked different. Smaller. We didn't realize how this came across, Brian said carefully. Darius nodded. That's the problem. They offered him the job. He declined. What do you want? Brian asked. Accountability, Darius replied. Not a title. An independent audit followed. Bias training. Policy changes. Some people called it progress. Others called it performative. Darius didn't label it. He moved on. Months later, he started consulting, helping companies see what they pretended not to. In one session, a manager asked, "How do we fix this?" Darius answered simply, "Stop assuming competence has a color." That line stayed with him. One evening, he received an email from a young black graduate. "I saw your interview video. I almost didn't apply anywhere. But I did. And I got the job." Darius leaned back in his chair. For the first time, the silence felt lighter. Not gone, but cracked. And that was enough to let something real through. The attention didn't fade the way people assumed it would. After the video spread, Darius found himself in a strange in-between space, too visible to be ignored, too inconvenient to be fully accepted. Invitations came wrapped in politeness, but motives were harder to read. Panels, podcasts, diversity discussions that wanted his presence more than his honesty. He learned quickly which conversations were real and which were cosmetic. At one corporate roundtable, a senior executive leaned toward him and said, "So what would you say is the biggest misconception people have about racism today?" Darius didn't rush his answer. "That it's loud," he said. "That it announces itself. Most of the time, it whispers. And people listen." The room fell quiet in that uncomfortable way when truth lands, but no one knows how to respond without exposing themselves. Outside of work, life shifted to a crack at a grocery store. A cashier recognized him and smiled. "You're that guy from the interview video, right?" Darius nodded cautiously. "My son watched it," she continued. "He's applying for jobs now. He asked me if that's how it really is." Darius swallowed. "What did you tell him?" She hesitated. "That it depends. But that speaking up matters." Moments like that stayed with him longer than the headlines ever could. Not everyone was supportive. Emails arrived accusing him of playing the victim. Comment sections questioned his competence, his tone, his motives. Some insisted he'd exaggerated. Though others claimed he was lucky to even get an interview. He didn't respond. He knew the pattern too well. When systems were challenged, they defended themselves by attacking the messenger. Late one night, Darius sat alone in his apartment. Lights off, city glowing beyond the windows. He replayed the interview again, not the viral clip, but the uncut version. He watched his own posture. Calm, professional, controlled, Slen. He remembered how much effort it took to stay that way. How exhausting it was to always be presentable, always careful not to confirm someone else's assumptions, bets. That was the part no one talked about. The labor of restraint. A few weeks later, he received a call from Meridian's former HR director. She'd resigned quietly after the audit. "I wanted to apologize," she said. Not on behalf of the company. On behalf of myself. Darius listened. I thought I was fair. She continued. I thought intentions mattered more than outcomes. I see now how wrong that was. Seeing it is a start, Darius replied. Sitting with it is the work. After the call, he didn't feel relief. But he felt something loosen. Change wasn't dramatic. It was slow, awkward, often unsatisfying. But it was happening in fragments, in policies rewritten, in conversations paused before bias slipped through. Months later, Darius was invited to observe interviews at a mid-sized firm he consulted for. He sat quietly in the corner as candidates rotated in and out. When a black woman entered the room, he watched the panel carefully. Their body language, their questions. This time, there was no shift, no tightening, no coded language. When she left, one of the interviewers said, "She's strong." Darius exhaled without realizing he'd been holding his breath. Afterward, the hiring manager asked him, "Is this what you meant?" "Yes," Darius said. "This is it." That evening, he walked home instead of taking a car. The city felt different at street level. Messy alive. Honest. He passed a group of teenagers laughing loudly. One of them wearing a hoodie that reminded him of himself years ago. Hopeful, uncertain, aware too early. He wondered what kind of world that kid would grow into. Not perfect. But maybe fairer. At home, Darius opened a fresh document on his laptop. He began. Writing not a speech, not a manifesto, just reflections. Patterns he'd noticed. Questions people were afraid to ask. He didn't know who would read it. But he knew why he was writing. Because silence had once cost him opportunity. And voice had given something back not just to him, but to people he might never meet. Weeks later, he received one final message from Meridian. They'd implemented blind resume reviews, structured interviews, accountability metrics tied to leadership bonuses. "We won't ask you to trust us," the email read. "But we wanted you to know." Darius closed the message without replying. Trust wasn't owed. It was earned, slowly, consistently, without cameras. That night, as he shut down his laptop, he realized something simple and grounding. He hadn't set out to be a symbol. He'd just refused to disappear. And sometimes, that was enough to make the system blink. Enough to interrupt the whisper. Enough to let someone else walk into a room and be seen fully fairly, without having to prove they belonged before they spoke. The city outside kept moving. So did he. Time moved forward, but the weight of everything that had happened didn't disappear. It settled instead, becoming part of Darius's daily rhythm. He learned how to carry it without letting it harden him. He started declining invitations that felt hollow. No more panels, where people wanted a headline quote without listening to the meaning behind it. No more conversations framed around optics. He chose smaller rooms, now places where questions were quieter but more honest. One university workshop, a student raised her hand and asked, "Do you think things will actually change? Or will people just move on?" Darius didn't sugarcoat his answer. "People will move on," he said. "Systems always hope they will. Change only happens when someone refuses to." The student nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later. After the session, a janitor approached him near the exit. An older black man with tired eyes and a gentle voice. "I watched your story," he said. "Didn't think someone like you would speak up." "Why not?" Darius asked. The man smiled faintly. Because speaking up usually costs us something." Darius felt that land deep. "It did," he admitted. "But staying quiet was costing me more." The man squeezed his shoulder once before walking away. That night, Darius dreamed of the interview again, but this time, the room was empty. No panel, no judgment. Just a chair and a mirror. He woke up unsettled but clear-headed. He understood something then. The hardest part wasn't being doubted. It was being conditioned to expect it. Breaking that conditioning took time. It took reminders. It took moments of hesitation where he chose not to shrink. Months later, Darius interviewed for a role himself, not because he needed it, but because he wanted to see how far the shift had reached. The interviewer was prepared, respectful, structured. Still, when the question came, how do you handle conflict? Darius felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He answered honestly. I address it early, he said. I don't wait for it to become personal. The interviewer nodded, no edge in his expression. No assumptions. When the interview ended, Darius sat in his car for a long moment before driving away. He wasn't celebrating. He was absorbing. This was what fairness felt like. Quiet, uneventful, human. Later that week, he received an email from a young man who'd grown up in the same neighborhood Darius had left years ago. I saw what you did, the message read. I didn't know we were allowed to say no. Darius stared at the sentence. Allowed. That word haunted him. He replied carefully. You were always allowed. They just hoped you wouldn't. As summer approached, the story that once defined him became something he referenced less and less. Not because it stopped mattering, but because it no longer trapped him in that moment. Hughes building forward, now. One evening, standing on his balcony as the sun dipped below the skyline, Darius realized he no longer replayed the interview in his head. He no longer imagined better responses or sharper comebacks. He'd said enough. What mattered now was how often rooms stayed open after he left them. Somewhere, someone else would walk into a space carrying the same quiet awareness he once did. They might never know his name. They might never see the video. But maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't feel the need to brace themselves before speaking. Net, Darius knew, was how real change moved. Not loudly, but steadily. One refusal at a time.